Look at all the trees, says Jesus, and as with the birds, it's worth really looking at the real trees, though not necessarily getting totally bogged down in botanical detail. There may be places where trees don't help, or where the wrong trees in the right places do more harm than good. Now, wetland habitats like this, in which Scotland is amazingly rich, provide shelter, food, and when they're allowed to be themselves without the encroachment of trees, they're also pretty good as places to store carbon. That's why not just care for the earth, but a dynamic listening partnership with the earth is what fosters a diverse and holy habitat. And that's the kingdom. Our readings today help us grasp what we gain from attention to the environment, and that is a deeper insight into the mind of God. As well as that, our learning of the Maker through what is made is not the only value to attribute to our fellow creatures. They are there to live life to the full, not just to teach us, although if we listen, that is what they do. God's greatness is not jealous. It can only be enriched by our love for fellow creatures. No sparrow falls without God's awareness, whether or not you have learned from that sparrow. I know some well-meaning Christians who need to stop defending God against the very things that reveal God's greatness. But because Christians across the board value prayer, that small offering which we send to God to do with what God wills, then none of our small actions, our initiatives, our light bulb changings, insulations, or cuttings down on plastic, none of that need be without value or significance. These things, after all, express our faith. As work and worship were drawn together in the beginnings of the Iona community, so prayer and creation care belong together from now on. Last week, in a service led by volunteers on Iona, I noted even there the apologetic embarrassment that stories of our relationship with nature might be, in some sense, pagan and therefore off limits. We need boldly to claim the mainstream stage of the faith and not be content with green Christianity shuffled off onto some marginal studio theatre, whilst everyone else gets on with what they think is the real thing. And by all means have special services, but in the same way that every Sunday celebrates the resurrection, so every gathering of the church happens thanks to the earth and to the grace of God. To talk of green Christianity ought to be about as absurd as talking about wet water. And like Ezekiel and Mark, when you speak of God, yes, speak of trees. Some of us used to conclude, reading the Old Testament, that it is the trees in the groves of the toxic religions that were the problem, rather than the spiritual abuse of the self-evident holiness of the trees, like those oaks who shed the welcome for Abraham and Sarah that they gave to God in Mamre. Wake up. Well into the Middle Ages, it was inconceivable for carvers of stone crosses that the cross of Christ was not always also a tree giving life and nourishment and shelter, sometimes to very happy birds. To experience awe and wonder at the greatness and the smallness of creatures and features of the planet is never in conflict with the dignity and majesty of God. For how else will our hearts know of it? As to the mustard seed, well, you can find smaller seeds, you can find larger shrubs. The smugness of the long-distance googler is no substitute for the smell and touch of the bark, the creak of the boughs in the wind. So I did look up mustard bush, and I noted how it's sometimes employed by humans for land reclamation or wind shelter in areas with saline and alkaline soil, With a smile, I read on the same website that the mustard bush is limited ornamental value. I wonder what the tree says about us. Kingdom is also readable as reign, as the way God does things. And so many of the examples of the kingdom of God and of heaven, the kingdom of the sky, concern cycles of rain and air and nourishment and seasons. We benefit because we breathe, at least as much as the birds, from the gift that the trees give in photosynthesis, let alone from their fruits which we enjoy. We do live, though, uniquely in recorded history at a time when everything with which Jesus defines and speaks about his kingdom is at risk. As it says so many times in the Bible, God is the maker of heaven and earth, of sky and soil. And it is science fiction rather than biblical faith to present these as different dimensions, hermetically sealed against each other. Creation is one. Both our readings emphasize partnership as the multiplier of small and manageable and beautiful actions and offerings in the flourishing of life, though only where there is an appreciation of letting one partner get on with what they do best. The earth will do what we cannot. Though let's not pretend we have no place. Let's not pretend, as maybe city dwellers of the 21st century, that our input and our presence is insignificant. Let's not perpetuate the European insult and injury of the homeland of others, arriving and declaring the Americas and Australia terra nullius, ours to trample whoever might already live there, whoever might already be involved in its care. For Jesus and Ezekiel, both the habitat for the birds, without whom the air is not the air, without whom heaven is not heaven, this has an indisputable value. And so the outcome of kingdom is ecological. And participation in the kingdom requires urgent alertness and awareness. At the instant of harvest, ready, set, go, no messing around. And that's the gift, of course, of Mark's gospel. Spiritual wisdom is activist. Spiritual wisdom is urgent. Real birds, real trees. When you look at the real Bible, there's no need for greenwashing. And greenwashing is the painting of the empty sepulchres of commerce and culture with a semblance of environmental integrity in order to safeguard a completely different agenda. Often profit, of course. The mission for which we will find resources and support there is one of responsibility to listen as well as to care for the flesh we share, for the earth in which Christ is incarnate. Just as the unembellished science is quite bad enough to be good enough for the human nations of the planet to take immediate and far-reaching action following the United Nations conference in Glasgow in November, so the scriptures we work with as churches are quite green enough to motivate care and deep partnership with the earth. And so the devotional and practical life of an eco-congregation can be more like stripping off blistered layers of boring magnolia paint to find underneath beautiful veined oak. Good news for every creature rather than just for us, as if we were an alien form of life to this planet. This admittedly varnished beauty has often survived the fear and scrupulousness in Protestant churches against art and images. I remember standing in a Welsh chapel surrounded by the most sumptuous woodwork, whilst a Presbyterian friend assured me that they had no visual tradition. Today in our faith, we're acknowledging the partner who was always there, working for our good in ways we may not have understood, acknowledging what God and the earth together bring forth, both from our planting, but also from our killing. We can now minutely describe the mechanisms of germination and of fruitfulness, though in the meantime and for thousands of years, indigenous peoples and others have been getting to know the earth face to face, eye to eye. Even if their wisdom, their relationship, their languages have been as cruelly and criminally disregarded as the voice of Earth's self. But just to gild the lily, cedars are mountain trees. They're at home in the Himalayas. It's therefore remarkable that what Ezekiel suggests, planting way up high, carries with it the wisdom of the right tree in the right place. And as with Jesus' mustard shrub, its deepest spiritual value is as a habitat for the birds, without whom the air is not the air, without whom heaven is not heaven. What trees know carries weight with Zeke's human hearers, because the trees really do, in their own way, know it. As the detailed life and communication of trees comes to light, we are no longer in any position to other them as lifeless. If trees recognize family and care for their young, then it's no exaggeration to recognize their place in God's choir, nor is it a sign of naivety to inquire what the trees have to teach us. A wilderness, as we encounter wilderness, is actually a place of partnership. Partnership with, rather than domination of, the earth and fellow creatures. And the life of the earth happens neither because nor without us. I am worried by the persistence of language, especially in prayers, which describes the earth as an object which is handed over completely to us, not even capriciously to do with as we like, but maybe more dangerously, long term, because it carries the trappings of wisdom to do with as we see fit. Well-meaning stewardship, therefore, is no substitute for dynamic partnership. God's covenant is with all life, rather than just with us. The world belongs to God, the earth, and all for whom the earth is home. How easy it remains to exclude fellow creatures and also people once we can classify them as less than we are. Good news has begun to get through. That planting trees is a good thing, and indeed being seen to throw some concessionary amount in that direction under the auspices of carbon offsetting, also known as buying off your conscience and keeping on flying, being seen to plant any old trees is a mainstay of greenwashing, easing the supposed green conscience of customers while continuing to pollute and explore for more oil, when it's been firmly established that just to burn what's already discovered will take the planet to a very, very uncomfortable place indeed. Like any other predator, and we've very recently come to see the benefits of wolves and of sharks in reefs, like any other predator, we cannot pretend that our presence anywhere on Earth will be neutral, though we need to hold on to the hope that our presence can be good. That's why our faithfulness and our spiritual resilience in crisis, our work for the kingdom, is far from pointless, far from hopeless, planting the right trees in the right places with eyes wide open, alert to the prophetic voice of the earth.